everybody. We're trying this as an experiment. We have 3 kids that are seniors that took it upon themselves to decide, you know what, we want to do something that Paynesville Schools doesn't offer. So they initiated it and said, what do you think about an independent project on topic of our choice? 2 of them, Eric Johnson and Cora Hedges, were approved in advance. And Andrew went off and kind of was doing his own thing, and we went, whoops, we need to recognize him as well. So tonight, what they're going to do is they're going to share their year-long independent projects with you. And I have 2 quotes that are some of my favorites that I looked up here. One of them, anybody seen the movie The Great Debaters?
They're all raising their hand.
I can see that. You can't see that from here. It is an awesome show that got absolutely terrible reviews. It has Denzel Washington in it, so if you like Denzel, that would be a good one to watch. In it, one of my favorite quotes there is, do what you have to do so you can do what you want to do. These kids are involved in so much, but they took the time to do this because they wanted to. The other one is from Albert Einstein, and it says, wisdom is not the product of schooling, but of the lifelong attempt to acquire it. And these kids are well on their way to becoming wise. So, with that, Andrew, you're up.
Thank you. Before we get started, I'd like to say Happy Mother's Day to all mothers out there. It's your night, so I thank you for being here. And with that, for the past year, or a couple of years, I've been working under the field of computer engineering, which that is based around the fields of electrical engineering and computer science. Now, electrical engineering is based around electric circuits, energy, power, and then computer science is the interfacing between that hardware and a user's experience, so developing software to run with that hardware. Now with that, I'd like to go with 4 projects of mine that I've been working on for the past couple of years. And so if you go to the next. So the first thing I've been doing is working with robotic arms. So as you can see from my first design a couple of years ago, I was messing around with this kit that Mr. Thompson gave me. And in there, it had a piece of circuitry called an Arduino. And this Arduino was being able to program, and you could connect components up to it. And so I began building this first robotic arm. However, it was very problematic, and I had a lot of troubles with actually starting this off. But before addressing some of those issues of what was happening with this robotic arm, I met up with another friend, Nathan Lai, and together we started making the second design. So the second design of a robotic arm is based around 3 things. The first one is that servos are a type of motor which only go from 0 to 80 degrees. And then these servos are based off of the signal that come from the Arduino, or the controller, which is controlled by 3 different knobs called potentiometers. Now these potentiometers, when you move them in the software, the Arduino would convert that signal into something that the servos can understand, making this robotic arm. Me and Nathan Lai, we have been messing around with this type of stuff for a while, and eventually we got to this 3rd design of a robotic arm, which kind of looks like a human arm. It's not the best, but as you can see, it was a prototype of something greater, and it used the same concepts as last time, except just the build was different. But this was our stepping stone to our 4th design, which was a major project which incorporated this 3rd design, except we would use our arm to control this robotic arm in order to make it so it was a lot more versatile and we could have some fun with it. So if you go to this next design. So in the 4th design, as you can see, it's version 2.0. Our first design that we built went kind of haywire and everything blew up, which was a waste of money. It was really sad. However, I was talking with Matt Dickhausen this year in starting this new project, which the school would pay for, and I would build it at the school and then leave it at the school for anybody else who wanted to work with it or mess around with it, they could. So I've written up a proposal and he okayed it, so he ordered the parts, and I began working on this robotic arm for a school project. So as you can see from the left picture, I have a black robotic arm with a present, which is a brick. And then on the other side, the right side of the picture, you can see that there's a brace that a person would connect to their arm and they could move it around. Now this has 4 points of rotation, so it could follow any person's movement with their arm pretty nicely. However, it is not the best type of design. We could still work on it. We still want to add hand and other types of sensors on it. Since it is my senior year though, I will be leaving that to other people that come across Paynesville schools. So if you look at the right picture here, at the top there's this blue circuit board, and that is one of the power distribution boards for this project, which is the main reason our first one failed, is because we did not have one of these, so everything was fried. So we learned from our past mistakes building this robotic arm, and from the middle you can see all the programming required to build it. It's not much, however, it is quite complicated once you get to look at it. So that is the ending of my robotic arm. However, if you would like to see it in action, you can look at episode 12 on BNC, and there is a video that you can watch. Otherwise, July 31st from 6 to 8 p.m., there is a showcasing of this robotic arm if you'd like to check it out. So that is my first project through my whole senior year, sorry. And now I would like to share with you my second project. So, one of the first things that I did when I started working with electronics was getting to computer logic and how the basics of computers actually start working. So the first thing I wanted to do was build a calculator out of different electronic parts, and this is what I came up with. So this is a 4-bit binary calculator. It uses 2 numbers in binary format, which go through a series of circuits called full adders in order to create a calculator. As you can see from the bottom of the left picture, 4 of these full adders are connected together. Each one adds a bit from each number, and together this outputs the final answer in LEDs, as you can see from the right picture, which are on. So in the middle picture, that is representation of a decimal number in binary. So using these 1s and 0s in electronic circuits, someone can manipulate this data into producing a working computer. However, I really wanted to make this larger, and I also wanted to add subtracting into this calculator in logic. So let's go to the next slide, please. So I expanded on this project by making it an 8-bit computer calculator, in which it also had subtraction. So if you look at the top of the left picture, there is a 4-bit binary adder and subtractor. I just took that diagram and I expanded it to the 8 bits. Now, to get negative numbers in binary, there are many different types of ways. However, I experimented with 2 main types. The first one was a signed bit negative number in binary, in which you take the first bit of a binary number and you invert it to make it negative. And then, so a 0 will be a positive number. However, manipulating this data in a calculator was quite hard, so I ended up going with a different version called 2's complement. Now, 2's complement, in the diagram, you add 1 to the first bit, and then you inverse all the second bits for the second number. It can get quite confusing, but it's a simple process after working with this stuff for a while. To the right is a fully working 8-bit binary calculator, in which the first and the third red switches are the 2 numbers that you input, which are 8 bits long. And then the middle is whether to add or subtract. Now, the output is the LEDs, just like last time. It produces 9 LEDs when adding and subtracting in binary numbers, and can get up to 512 in a decimal format. So that is one of the main projects that I started off with just hardware and electrical components rather than using software in any of these projects. And it has been one of the most crazy and complex ones that I've been working with, as you can see from all the wires. It took a while to make. But with that, I'd like to actually start getting into making programmable computers using this type of setup and logic. However, that would be a later project. But that is the second project I made this year. So going on to the next project. So I was working with a friend and we were playing around with a bunch of different stuff, and we came up with this idea called lane games. Now it kind of sounds weird, but we were building these games kind of like the one on the left, in which they were all text and they were based in your computer using a programming language called Python. Now these games would be made in 30 minutes or less, so they were really crappy games, thus they were called lane games. And we wanted to expand and make this bigger so people could play around with it and maybe join us if they wanted. So Nathan Lai was just starting to get into website building, so he started creating a website for this lane games idea that we had. And from past experiences of building a couple websites and having some fun with Python programming, I decided I wanted to create my own server so we didn't have to pay somebody else to host our website. So that is what this Raspberry Pi is for. Not for eating, sadly, but this is a computer the size of your palm that can do any basic computer tasks, such as browsing the web, or looking at emails, or running basic programs. So using this computer, we are able to make a certain amount of programs that would run in order to display some web content, so people can go into their search bar on Google or whatever they use, and they can look up our website, which would be linked to this computer, which would display the data it needs to be. And then after we got our website up and running accordingly a little bit, we started making an application, so this application could talk to the website and the games in order to display the data from the games that the players use and created. So if you look at this diagram to the right, I have a box that's a server and something that's a client. So the server is hosting these web files that when you search in your Google, it runs to this computer. And then it also has the databases of all the data that users create and store in this application of theirs. Now the client accesses the website through an internet protocol called HTTP, and so they can check out everything on the web browser. However, they can also download an application from the Lane Games website that connects to all these games that we create in our Lane Games idea. And then all of that data is sent through another internet protocol called SSH, which is stored in the databases from the server. So with this as a big loop, it's under active development right now. We're not fully supported, as we are also trying to switch our servers from this Raspberry Pi to a Windows computer. It's still taking some process, however, it is a month or two away from being done. So that's really cool. And so this leads to my final project, inner workings of a drone. So when I was first starting out with this Arduino type thing, I first was really like, I really want to make a drone. However, doing some research online, I kind of figured out that it was a little hard for my level of expertise, which was absolutely zero. So after a while, this year, this past summer, I started looking back into this idea of building a drone. And from countless YouTube videos and internet posts, I came up with this initial plan to the left, which included a couple basic things. The first of which was being a flight controller, which controlled all the motors and the data from the remote control. And then it also contains the power distribution board, which I said was also very necessary for a robotic arm, so that nothing burnt out while we were flying the drone. So this flight controller and power distribution board was also connected to the motors through these things called electronic speed controllers. Now these electronic speed controllers would take a small signal from the flight controller and it would convert it into a large enough signal that the motors could run without dropping out of the air, so then they would crash and break everything. So that was my initial plan for this drone. And these are two pictures of the current state, which have a couple other things that I will be explaining later, but The top one you can see on the top, that light is from the flight controller board, which is the main controller of everything. And then on the bottom picture, you can see that there's two antennas. The tallest one is the GPS for the flight controller, in which this is a smart drone, so it can do everything autonomously when it's pre-programmed, which also leads to my second addition. Switch the slide. So the first addition to this drone was adding a live video feed. I thought of this before I actually started designing the drone, just to make sure that I was getting the necessary parts in order to make this work. So the first addition was adding this live video feed. Now this required me to add another battery, an antenna, and a camera to the drone, which also added weight, which I had to make sure that was less than how much weight was necessary to make the drone fall out of the air. So after doing a little bit of research on Amazon and looking at customer reviews, I ended up going with a smaller camera. However, I did figure out how to get the data from the flight controller to the receiving end of the video feed, so you can look at all of the problems and all the data from the flight. As you can see in the picture, there are 8 satellites connected to it, and it also shows the elevation, which is 18 meters, and a couple other things. Now this addition was pretty straightforward and simple to add. However, addition 2 will be a lot more complex. This also adds in the Raspberry Pi computer that I had beforehand with the server, and the ultrasonic sensors for finding distances. The reason for adding this is to make the drone fully autonomous, in that I do not have to control anything. It will fly itself, and it will detect objects using these ultrasonic sensors. So this is still under active development as well. The drone flies already, as you can see from the video, but it's still very promising, and I will begin working on addition 2 very shortly. So this is my 4th and final project. And with that, I'd like to ask if anybody has any questions. You can go to the next slide. If you don't, you can also email me that email as well. So, thank you.
Andrew, how do you learn everything?
YouTube videos.
Yeah.
Watching YouTube videos. Yep, that's pretty much it. Yeah. Sweet.
What's your dream job?
Right now, there's a couple of different things, but I'd say either working at SpaceX or working on quantum computers. Pretty exciting. Yep. Sweet. Thank you.
Senior project this year was broadly called the universe, which made things challenging but also super interesting. So I've gotten to learn about black holes, planets, stars, constellations, and overall the vastness of the universe and how it began and how complex life on Earth is. So first off, I have this picture, and that was taken by one of the Voyager missions. And it's a picture of Earth from 4 billion miles away. And Earth is actually in that really top ray of sunlight, that tiny little dot. Yep, that's it. So, just looking at that picture makes me realize how life on Earth is completely amazing, and it was fine-tuned almost exactly for us, but it didn't always start out that way. So, all the odds were against the creation of Earth. It started off with leftover gas from the formation of the sun, but that wasn't even the hardest part. It was a violent beginning with collisions and accidents and events that, if they didn't happen, we wouldn't be here today. So fine-tuning is basically the fact that there's a bunch of these fundamental constants, and if even one decimal was off on them, we wouldn't be able to survive. I learned about fine-tuning from my pastor at the Lutheran Church, which was super cool, because he kind of connected that with faith and religion and a bunch of that cool stuff. So I also recommend the book You Are the Universe, because it has some pretty radical ways of thinking about the experiences that we're having and the ways that you should think about yourself. And it talks a lot about relativity of things, like time, space, all that good stuff. But so another thing that I learned about this year was one of the more controversial topics, I guess, that comes up a lot in the discussion about the universe, and that's the Big Bang Theory. In the science realm, it's the most accepted theory, and you can kind of see why, because it makes a lot of sense. Basically, 14.6 billion years ago, there was nothing, and in that nothing, there somehow came to be this tiny little cube of matter and energy. And after that happened somewhere, we don't know where or how, but that exploded and it created everything that there is today. So the reason why it has a bunch of evidence supporting it is the cosmic background radiation. So that's basically like we have technology that can see the radiation that's left in space, and we can date it back. So that's how we know it's 14.6 billion years ago, and it basically creates a little baby picture of the universe, you could say. Yeah, so ever since then, the universe has been expanding. And some theorists say that as time goes on, it's expanding even faster. And that's been happening for 14.6 billion years, so quite a bit of time. But yeah, the universe is insanely huge. And there are millions upon millions of different stars, galaxies, black holes. It's really amazing. If you sit and think, we're on a rock, and it's not even a significant rock compared to other ones. We're orbiting a ball of gas that's not even a big star, and we're in the outskirts of a medium-sized galaxy. Humans have barely even existed in the big scheme of the entire universe. We're essentially a blip in the timeline, but we're here nonetheless. And this leads me on to the miracle of life on Earth. So we know we're here, but we don't really know why. And some sort of existentialism has to plague everyone a little bit, or at least me, I guess. But anyways, I'm super eager to always learn about the miracle of life on Earth. And after studying a lot of just the solar system, it boggles me how we somehow ended up on this planet that has so many different forms of life. I watched a documentary, One Strange Rock, which is on Netflix. It's so great. I recommend it extremely. But it gave me a perspective about our Earth. It talks about Earth from the perspective of 8 different astronauts, and just seeing it from up there, I guess, in that way that they're so separated from everyone else, really had an impact on them, and then that made an impact on me. But yeah, this is the one place in the entire universe that we get to call our own, and it needs to be saved and we need to fix climate change, but this isn't that TED Talk, that's right. Now we know how vaguely the Earth was formed, but what's actually holding it together is the next big question. So in my first semester, I focused on a lot of big questions, which was interesting but also confusing because there's a lot of complex physics involved, and that's not my forte to say the least. But there's some possible theories and hypotheses that caught my attention. The first of these is string theory. So string theory explains the nitty-gritty of particles. It deals with a lot of quantum mechanics, which is physics for the really small stuff in the universe, like atoms and quarks and stuff like that. Like I said, confusing. String theory digs a little deeper than that. So I'm going to read off Google's definition of string theory after I searched string theory for dummies. String theory proposes that the fundamental constituents of the universe are one-dimensional strings rather than point-like particles. Wow. A good way that I've had it explained to me through reading various books and Wikipedia articles is that it's like the strings of a piano. And depending on frequency or vibration, however that string is moving, it creates a note. So in string theory, however the strings are moving, this creates a particle. There's also a slight problem with this theory. but the fact that it's never been proven in real terms, it falls into a branch of theoretical physics, which basically means that there's a really great equation for it, but in real life we don't have the technology or the means to really say that it's for sure. Another problem with it is that it conflicts with Einstein's theory of general and special relativity, which focuses on things like planets and other large areas of the universe, whereas string theory is on small stuff. So because of this, physicists like Stephen Hawking have been consumed with the Big Four theory of everything, which sounds great because it explains literally everything, but we don't have it. But it would change how we see the world. The same thing happened when Einstein put forth his ideas of general relativity, because he kind of redefined physics. And I think if we discovered a theory of everything, that sort of thing would happen today as well. So after going through that semester of the big unanswerable questions, I decided to focus a little bit more on the stuff that we've already learned about and we've already had covered. So that includes stuff like the solar system, moons, constellations, and the sheer size of spatial objects. So first I learned about our planetary system and how revolutionary the Voyager missions were in 1977. They captured pictures of like every planet, including discoveries of Saturn, Neptune, Jupiter, and Uranus. It also allowed astronomers to figure out that Uranus orbited on a tilt, which is wonky. Another large discovery was actually how complex that Jupiter's moons are. So moons like Io and Europa, they were actually found to have ice on them and really beautiful surfaces. And they're basically just bonuses along the Voyager mission. And the Voyager missions are actually still in space, and they're still sending data back to Earth, and that's really cool. And they're also, I think, the farthest objects that are away from Earth that are man-made right now. So NASA's website helped me discover a lot about the orbits of these planets and even discover their topography and stuff through their programs. But the next most interesting thing to me this time was the size of spatial objects. So I attached a video that will show the differences between sizes of stars, planets, and other things. That should be the next step. to say the least. Because you just watch the video and think, okay, Saturn's pretty big, and then sun's pretty big too, and then UI Scooty, the largest known star in the universe, is huge. And the Cat's Eye Nebula, then everything in the universe keeps being surpassed by some greater, more impressive thing, and the comparison between our little planet and the huge stars in that video was a pretty notable topic that I explored this year. So, what's next? Space exploration, I believe, is of the utmost importance. We need to know more about where we are and what we can do to reach out from our little planet. Of course, attempts have already been made to make contact with some extraterrestrial life, and for instance, this includes the Golden Record. So, the Golden Record was extremely intriguing to me when I first started looking into it. Basically, they had this one cool dude named Carl Sagan orchestrate the whole thing. And as he once said, we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. And this is true. We're just as much of the universe as the constellations that we see in the sky. So, Sagan and a team of scientists started to create the Golden Record, which take on the cosmos along with the Voyager mission. So on the record, it's like a physical record that has 115 pictures on it, sounds of the Earth, a variety of music samples from different cultures, time periods, and there's human voices and also different languages and everything that will let intelligent life know who and where we are. The pictures included cover everyday life, but also a scientific view of Earth. And since Voyager will be drifting through interstellar space for a very, very long time, there's a chance that intelligent life will somehow come to mind if there's some out there. I'm not really going to go into that today. But by the time that happens, we could be long gone. In, I think, 17.6 billion years, the sun will expand in its dying red giant phase, and the Earth will be absorbed by it. But if humans are able to survive this, we could possibly find a home on Kepler 22b, which is a planet that was shown in this video right after Earth. So it's about twice the size of Earth, and it's right in the habitable zone of its star, so it's not too close to its sun, it's not too far away. But for us, we don't have the technology to observe it in great detail yet. But we do know that it has an Earth-like atmosphere that would allow the presence of liquid water. So it was discovered a few back, but it's still on NASA's radar. And after the death of humanity, what's left then? There'll be no one to experience the wonders of it anymore, or that we know. But anyways, that's the religion problem, so I'm going to leave that one to Eric, and make sure to answer that in your presentation.
Does anybody have any questions for Cora?
All right. Good evening, everyone. How's it going? So, I was telling these guys, I was telling Cora and Andrew earlier that they both have their topics are more topics that the audience. I mean, unless you guys really study that topic, they probably don't know much about. But for me, I have the job of trying to explain to you guys something that you all have an opinion about. So I'm going to try to be as unbiased as possible. And I mean, it's tough. It's religion. I mean, cut me some slack here. But yeah, I'll be trying to talk about the future of Christianity. So if you go to the next slide. Okay. So here's a map of Asia, and you're probably thinking, what the heck does that have to do with religion? But so one of the religions that I studied to start was Hinduism. Okay, and if you're like me, I hardly knew anything about Hinduism. In fact, I mean, of the 5 world religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, this was probably the one that I had absolutely no idea about. But it's really a fascinating religion. I think it's the most fascinating one to learn about just because it's, first of all, the oldest religion, and so that second of all means that there's a lot of unknowns about it. Whereas Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, and Islam all have a single founder. Well, maybe not Judaism, but Hinduism is much more of a cultural thing, and there's so much uncertainty about it, and just how it all started, it's really quite unknown. So, yeah, Hinduism it's an Indian religion. If you think about India, you think about Hinduism. In fact, the word Hinduism is just another word for India. India. And you see they sound the same. So it really, that's the most interesting thing is there's not much separation between India and Hinduism. It's basically one thing. Hinduism is oftentimes known as just the culture of India. So, with it being such an Indian culture, Indian religion, where do you guys think it started? Armenia. Yeah. Good. So as you guys know where it's up. Armenia's up there by around Georgia, around the Black Sea, and that whole area. And what's really fascinating about this was one of the first things that I had studied, was scholars are predicting, once they've gotten more research, all these anthropologists and these really smart people, they've figured out that there's, of all the cultures and all the languages that started in India or Europe or America, all those, so let's say like German, French, Italian, Sanskrit, all those languages, scholars are now predicting started with one single language. And they're calling it the Proto-Indo-European language, okay? And weird, it starts in Armenia. That's where they say the creation of this Proto-Indo-European language was. And that's such an irrelevant country. I didn't even know what that was before I did my research on it, to be honest. So that's just an interesting thing. And then from there, they broke apart. They don't know much about the language, first of all, yet they don't know how it drifted apart. But there's a group of people who went over to Iran. There's a group of people who were like the Celtics. There's a group of people who went up to Norse lands. So they're just eventually, they broke apart. And the year is unknown. It was just a long time ago, probably like 50,000 BC. It just, it took they for some reason broke apart. And eventually one of those groups, the Indo-Iranians, also known as the Aryans, they made their way down to India, okay? And I'm sure if you guys know your World War II, a lot of you are thinking the Aryans, isn't that what Hitler called the superior race? And he was talking about those Aryans, but it was a big misconception because, in fact, it wasn't even a race. It was just a group of a group of people that were tied linguistically, so they had a common language. And Hitler tried going on that and using it to say that the Aryans were the superior race, but that's World War II. That's not what I'm talking about. So, if you go to the next slide, please. So, once they got to India, and there was already people in India. There was the Indus Valley civilization, one of the oldest civilizations of all time. They were living there since about 4000 BC. But once they got there, they merged with this already current culture, the Indus Valley civilization. And they brought with them their texts, and they brought with them their religion, and they brought it in the form of the Vedas, okay? So, in the Christian community, a comparison would obviously be the Bible, to an extent, all right? So anyway, this was the foundation of Hinduism. This is how it started, was through the Vedas. And there's just hymns, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the Vedas that explain how the Hindus should practice. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so there's basically four basic, and I'll elaborate on this later, but there's four basic beliefs in Hinduism, okay? So first of all, in the top right corner you see that universe-looking person, okay? And it's not a real picture. I assume you guys knew that, but trust me, it's not. So this is the metaphysical being in Hinduism known as Brahman, okay? So Brahman is kind of the universal goodness, the universal spirit that is in everyone. It's like in each person there's a Brahman, in every tree, in all of nature, in all of the universe. It's just this universal force of good, universal force of spirit that is known as the Brahman. And the Brahman is actually, he's a god, so he's the top god, but he is formless and he's faceless and he's not human. So this was just a photo that they made to show kind of that he's just a force instead of a human, but it's actually disrespectful in Hinduism to associate a face and to associate body parts with Brahman. So thankfully I'm not presenting this in a Hindu community, otherwise I might get in trouble for showing a face. But yeah, so after Brahman, there are three main gods and goddesses that Brahman is broken apart into, okay? So for another Christian comparison, it's kind of like the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, where it's three different things, but in the same part, it's just one main thing. So over all the way on the left, you have that's Brahman, and then all the way to the left is with the three heads, Brahma. They're not very creative with their names. Yeah, so Brahma is known as Brahma the creator. So Brahma is known as the one that creates the universe and the one that will continue to create it. I'll explain that a bit more too. And in the middle there you have Vishnu. It's Vishnu the preserver. And Vishnu is the one that's in charge of maintaining happiness, maintaining health, maintaining everyone's being in the universe. And then finally, all the way on the right, you have Shiva, the destroyer. And that sounds really harsh, and it sounds like it'd be the villain god, but it's actually the Hindus belief that all of Earth and all of reality is one big cycle. So there's going to be multiple creations, and then Vishnu will preserve it, and then Shiva will end up destroying it when there's a good time to destroy it, and it'll all keep going. It's just a big cycle, and that's Hindus are big on cycles. And speaking of which, this bottom left one, it's alluding to reincarnation. So Hindus obviously believe in, I mean maybe not obviously, but all these Eastern religions, they believe a lot in reincarnation. So over in our Western culture, we kind of think of reincarnation as, so reincarnation is associated strongly with karma, right? So what goes around stays around. And we believe in the Western world, we think of it like, if I slap someone today, I'm going to get slapped tomorrow or something like that. But that's not the case. So the Hindus believe that their works, their actions, what they do in this world is going to affect who they become in the next world, right? So let's say there's a Hindus lady and she is really good, okay? I mean, she does everything right. She follows all the Hindus laws. She follows the Vedas. Then maybe she will, when she's reincarnated, she will be maybe a higher caste, or she will be born into a higher family, okay? So it's in the new life. And, I mean, they believe that there's multiple rebirth lives after, I mean, it's not just one reincarnation, it's many. And on the vice versa, maybe there's a Hindus who doesn't follow the Vedas, doesn't do anything, they're a bad Hindus, and they could be reincarnated as, say, a cat or a tree, which would be really unfortunate. But, yeah. And so, it's the thing that's being reincarnated is the soul, the Brahman. Everyone has a Brahman, and that is it's called the Atman when it's talking about a single person. And the Atman is being reincarnated into the same soul of the next life, right? So once you get good enough karma for that one soul, that one Atman, once they go through enough lives where they build up enough karma, they will obtain something called moksha, which is kind of like nirvana if you're thinking of Buddhism. But moksha is just peace, it's inner peace, and at that point, you join Brahman. You become one with the universal soul. You become one with Brahman. You add the Brahman. So, interesting concept, I think. I mean, they're thinking of an afterlife, kind of, and so I would say that they do have an afterlife. And then finally, just how they reach a good karma is by following their dharma. Rhymes there too. They really need to get a better vocabulary. But so the dharma is basically just the goal, what every Hindus individually should strive for. So maybe an American word would be like vocation, okay? So each Hindus is already given inherently a role and a job and just things they have to do in their life that are deeds for them, you know? So in order to have good karma, you need to follow your own dharma. That could be a song. Anyway, go on to the next one, please. But the most interesting thing, and this is, I mean, the rest of Hinduism isn't really important to my, the future of Christianity, but I did a whole bunch of studying on it, and I figured I better talk about it. But this idea here is going to come back when I talk about the future of Christianity. So, I read a book by Wendy Doniger, and one of the quotes is, in answer to several of the objections to the word Hinduism, some scholars have tried to identify a cluster of qualities, each of which is important but not essential to Hinduism. Not every Hindu will believe in or do all of them, but each Hindu will adhere to some combination of them, as a non-Hindu would not. Okay, so if you guys understand that, that basically means that. So if we go back to those 4 things, you don't need to go back. But those are 4 things that most Hindus kind of believe. I mean, some maybe believe in a Brahmin more than others. Some maybe would worship Vishnu. Some maybe would worship Shiva. Some maybe wouldn't worship any of them at all. Some maybe don't believe in reincarnation. And I mean, these are differences that are different than, say, the Christian denominations, right? So, I mean, the Christian denominations, maybe it's where's our authority? Is it in the Pope? Is it in the Bible? But these are completely different. I mean, it's like, is there a God or is there not a God? But what's interesting about the Hindus is for the people who believe in God and people who don't believe in God, they're still Hindus. They still worship together. They still are considered the same religion, and that's something that is really not kind of foreign to us Western people. And what I think, I mean, kind of on another tangent, but us in this Western world, we're so used to categorizing people into things such as, like, I mean, maybe political party, maybe religion, just things like that. And if you don't adhere to that, the doctrines of whatever you belong to, it's just really strange. I mean, if you're a Republican, everyone's going to believe 100% what the Republicans do usually. And so, when we hear something like this, where they have completely different beliefs, but they're categorized in the same thing, that's strange. But it's cool, I think. It's strange, but it's cool. And so I'll get back to that at the end. You can go to the next slide. Alright, so moving on from Hinduism, I now have I'll talk a little bit about Buddhism here too, and it'll have a little impact on what I'm thinking, projecting for the future of Christianity, alright? So, for those of you who don't know about Buddhism, Buddhism had a founder. It was Siddhartha Gautama, also known as the Buddha. But anyway, as legend has it, he was the son of a really rich and noble family. And this was in India, and they don't know the exact date of his birth, but in BCE, so olden times. And there was lots of suffering going on. I mean, that's just human nature, human reality is suffering. And since his parents wanted him, it was prophesied that he was going to become, he was going to just reject the whole entire world, then become a Buddha like he is. So they tried hiding him away from everything. For the first 20 years of his life, as legend has it, he didn't escape his house at all. He just stayed there, and he was fed all the riches of the world. He was given everything he wanted, and he was made to think that life was just perfect. There was nothing wrong with it, okay? And then once he got to a certain age, he went out and he saw the world, and he saw there was suffering everywhere. I mean, there was people dying, there was people hungry, there was people in the streets, and that got to him. I mean, that made him think, and so he did. He ended up renouncing life, and he ended up going into asceticism like that. So he ended up meditating for 40 days, as legend has it, and he came up with this next thing. Go to the next slide. So, first of all, he came up with the 4 noble truths. Okay, the 4 noble truths are 1, that there is suffering in life, and 2, that suffering comes from having desires. Okay, and then 3 was that suffering can end by ending desires, and then 4, you can end desires by following the Eightfold Path. So it wasn't the most clever thing. I mean, I don't know why I needed to do 4 different things, but hey, I'm not going to hate on it. So the Eightfold Path. This is how you get rid of desires, and this is how you achieve lack of suffering. This is how you can get rid of suffering, right? So it starts with right understanding, and that's understanding the text, the philosophies of Buddhism. And then it goes to right thought, right speech, right action. Those are just pretty self-explanatory. Just make sure you're thinking good things, make sure you're saying right things, make sure you're doing right things. And then right livelihood, just make sure you're living the right way. I mean, that comes to happiness, and it comes to, that's more of the moral stuff. And then it's right effort, make sure you do 100% good in everything you do. And then it's the right mindfulness, which is the most important thing to me, okay? So, stereotypically, when you think of Buddhism, you think of yoga, you think of meditation, you think of a more inner religion, a more individualized religion. And that's what Buddha was talking about here with right mindfulness, is they just have really prioritized spiritual purity and spiritual happiness and just feeling good spiritually. And that has huge implications on the future of Christianity. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to transition to what my topic actually is, and that is the future of Christianity, okay? So this book is called The Great Emergence by Phyllis Tickle. It's probably one of the leading books in the academic study of religion. I'd say right now it's the leading book. Okay, and what it tries to, what it's describing is this right here. So about every 500 years, the church feels compelled to hold a giant rummage sale. We are living in and through one of those 500-year sales. Okay, so that's said by Bishop Mark Dyer and quoted by Phyllis Tickle, and from then she was captivated by that idea and she wrote this book. So I'll explain more about what it is on the next slide. Okay, so since Jesus was born, all the way up to current day time, about every 500 years, there's been just a major reform, change, and just revolution in the Christian church. And actually, they go in and make the argument that even before that, in all of religion, there's big changes. But we'll just focus on Christianity for this, okay? So, in 4 to 6 BC, not actually 0 BC, we figured this out in the card today, but Jesus was born. And I just think it's so interesting that he was an African-American man, actually, so I just put that in there in that picture. It's very interesting. Yeah, and obviously, you can see how that was, it's historical that Jesus was living, and there's obviously up to some debate about whether he was divine or not, but it's historical proof that he was living, and it was around this time. And it obviously had huge impacts on the Christian church. It started the church, it started Christianity, and the Bible, and all that, right? So, about 500 years later, 590, 604, we had a guy named Gregory the Great. And he was a pope in Rome. And this was about the time of the fall of the Roman Empire. So what he did was right after the Roman Empire fell, that was Christianity's, that's how it survived. That was basically the only place where Christianity was really, really thriving. And when it fell, the future of Christianity did not look very promising. It looked like it might die. And what he did is he started the Pope, and he started the papacy, and he brought it together so it was formed one more coherent system of Christianity, and he kept it alive. And so this is the only one, I guess the first two are more bringing things together reform. He started monasticism, he just was instrumental in making change to the Christian church, and obviously Jesus was. So they brought people together. But when we get here, the reform is different. The reform is a split. So in 1054, if you notice, it's roughly 500 years after, there was the Great Schism. And the Great Schism was the separation of the Eastern Orthodox Church to the Christian or the Catholic Church in Rome. So, this is crazy, but one of the biggest things that caused the split between the Eastern Orthodox Church and Christianity, Eastern Orthodox is Christianity, but Catholicism, is whether or not you should use leaven or leaven, I don't know how to pronounce the word, bread in communion. That was probably the number one thing that caused just a massive split between the two, is what kind of bread you should use. That's kind of ridiculous, I think, but it's hilarious. And it obviously has had some crazy impacts on the future of the whole entire world. So, yeah, and what's unique about this is there was not really a single person who was instrumental in creating that. It was just a bunch of people, a bunch of build-up, and it eventually ended in the Eastern Orthodox Church and Catholicism. Catholicism in Europe and the Eastern Orthodox Church more in Russia and all those Eastern European countries. And then 1517, all right, this is probably my favorite part of all of religion, is just the Protestant Reformation. And again, 500 years after. And so Martin Luther is, credited with starting the Protestant Reformation by posting the 95 Theses on the door of the church in Wittenberg. And so what happened is he was arguing that salvation should come from Christ alone instead of through the Pope, and everyone needs to read, and instead of just the authority being able to read Scripture. So he obviously, those were some big claims, much more than what kind of bread you should use. And it ended up with Protestants and the Catholics. I mean, it was definitely a deadly affair. It was unfortunate and all the tragedy that went on because of it. But a split definitely happened, and a split definitely caused a major change in the world as we know it today. All right, you can go to the next slide. I just threw this in for fun. That's me as Martin Luther. Yeah, I thought that in about a year ago. He's my man. He's kind of a terrible person. I mean, if you read about what he did and some of the stuff he did was not very good, but he's awesome. I mean, come on. So yeah, you can go to the next one. I just wanted to throw that in. All right. So obviously, every 500 years, there's been some sort of change in Christianity, and what Phyllis Tickle is arguing is that, I mean, it was 1517 was when he posted the theses, and if you think about it, it's 2019, so 500 years from that would have been 2 years ago, and there was lots of celebrations and lots of things commemorating the 500 years of anniversary of the Reformation. But that also means that, hey, we're due for a rummage sale, we're due for a change in the church. And it's been 4 different times. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe it's just a pattern. And obviously, I wouldn't believe that there'd be a big change in Christianity, except for I think we are in the era, we're in the time where it's going to happen. I mean, there's just, I'll show you the statistics after this, but we're in a society that's very vulnerable to change in religion, I think. And so I think we could be seeing a huge change in religion, and these are just some ideas as to what they could be. So you can go to the next one. So a huge phenomenon that's been going on lately is the rise in the spiritual but not religious community. And I'm going to articulate exactly what they are because it's super important. Okay, so the PewResearch.com, they've done all this studying and this research on the spiritual but not religious community. And so they did surveys of a whole bunch of people. I think it said the number somewhere on there, but it was a huge amount of people. And what they found, so first they asked someone, are you spiritual? Are you religious? And that was it. And what they found is this, okay? And first of all, I want to go back. So a lot of times we associate spirituality and religion as the same exact thing. But obviously, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the difference, there's some sort of, society sees some sort of difference between them. And I'll try to explain that a bit later. But so here's from 2012 to 2015, here are the statistics, okay? So those that answer that they're both spiritual and religious is down 11%. In, 4 years? That's incredible. 11% in 4 years, from 59% of the American population to 48% of the American population. But on the other hand, the spiritual but not religious, those that say they're spiritual but not religious, is up 8%. The fastest, by far the fastest rising group out of all those, okay? So that went from 19% of the American population to 27% of the American population. So about a fourth of all of America claim that they're spiritual but not religious. And yeah, that's the group that I'm going to focus on. But I'll just keep going. So those that are neither religious nor spiritual is up 2%. So not much of a change there from 16 to 18%. And then the spiritual but not, religious but not spiritual is no change, 6% to 6%. So yeah, those 2 first ones up there are really what's interesting to me, because people are significantly saying that they're less and less religious now, but they're, as much decrease in the people saying that, there's as many people saying that they're not spiritual but not religious. So to me, that gives me optimism for the future of the church, because people aren't necessarily turning to neither spiritual nor religious. In other words, like atheism or agnosticism, they're turning to spiritual but not religious, where they still seek divinity, they seek spiritual goodness in this world. And we all have our different interpretations of what spiritual means, but to me, I just think it's people are seeking a more individualized, they're wondering how the world is, and they're doing it. They don't want to be told what to think. They want to use introspection, and they want to try to cultivate their spirit to the point where they can make their own opinions about what is going on in this world. They don't want to have a specific set of doctrines being saying, you have to believe this, you have to believe that. So I think that's where that big growth is coming from in the spiritual but not religious category. You can go on. So just some more statistics here which prove that it's growing into an even bigger thing, okay? So they're changed by age. This is over on this side. I don't know if you guys can see those numbers, but so for 18 to 29-year-olds, this is again 2020, 2012, 2017, this is the spiritual but not religious. So those who said they were spiritual but not religious in 2012 for 18 to 29-year-olds was 20%, and in 2017 it was 29%. And this was the most recent survey, otherwise I would have gotten the 2019 stats, and I'm sure they'll come up with probably about every 5 years new stats in it. And so about a 10% increase for the 30 to 49% group too, so 20 to 30%. And then 50 to 64 is 21 to 29, so still some pretty significant growth there. That was, when I was looking at these stats, that was more than I would have thought. But then 65 or older is 14% to 17%. So those are your more probably traditional people who knew what the church was like that 65 or more years ago, right? And another interesting thing is that the spiritual but not religious members and their identification with religious groups is, okay, so 37% of people who are spiritual but not religious say that they're unaffiliated with any religion, okay? So a third of people. I mean, that's way smaller than I would have thought too. I mean, that's pretty impressive to me. And next, it's the Protestants, and 35% of those who say they're spiritual but not religious say they identify with the Protestant Church, 14% with the Catholic Church, and 11% with others. So that would be Eastern Orthodox, Hinduism, Buddhism. So these people are saying that although I am spiritual and not religious, I still identify with this church. And to me, what that means is that people aren't turning, I mean, even if they disagree with the church, even if they don't like what the church is doing, they're not turning away from it. And to me, that means that the church has great reasons to be optimistic about the future, because, I mean, if people were leaving the church, they would, I mean, there would be no way to be 100% unaffiliated, but they're staying with the Protestants and they're staying with the Catholics and others, primarily for what I think is because just the attractiveness of the community, the attractiveness. I mean, just think, there's not really any place for adults to go to live in community with people, to be interacting with people in like a close, tight bond. And that's why people can't leave, because they enjoy that. I mean, they're inherently drawn to that. So that's very optimistic for the future of the church. You can go on. So yeah, and this is, what does this mean? And to me, I think that this is what year 500 is. This is where we're going. This is what the change is in the Christian church. It's the spiritual but not religious. And I want to say that it won't cause a reformation, a big split in the church. I want to say that it won't cause war and anger and madness, But as we saw with the Reformation, I mean, Martin Luther, his goal was not to split with the church. He didn't want to make a whole new Protestant church. He wanted to reform the church. And that didn't work. It didn't work at all. So I have a feeling if this thing really catches on, most likely, if those people who are in the church right now saying that they're spiritual but not religious, if they join together, it probably won't be a reform in the church, but instead maybe a whole new branch, a whole new denomination of these spiritual but not religious people. And like I said, I mean, a lot of people I'm sure are like, well, why don't they just not go to church at all? And it's because they need a place to go. Otherwise, I mean, they're going to stay in church, but they just want a more individualized approach to their spirituality, to their religion, and their metaphysical being. So yeah, what the future church may look like. And this is where I connected with Hinduism and Buddhism. So as you saw with Hinduism, that part that I shared where everyone, I mean, reincarnation, not reincarnation, God, not God, all Hindus, right? They're all considered the same thing. And so I think that might be what the future of the church looks like. So let's say there's a Christian, spiritual but not religious person, or they're spiritual but not religious with an identification with Christianity, right? So maybe they believe, I believe in God, I believe in the moral goodness of Jesus, but I don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. With someone spiritual but not religious who maybe believes, oh, I believe Jesus was the only divine thing, there's no other God, there's no Holy Spirit. And I mean, those are two totally different belief systems, but maybe they'll come together. Maybe they'll worship together, maybe they'll be in the same church, just like they do in Hinduism. Maybe it'll be just one group where they they collectively try to cultivate their spirits. They collectively try to understand their meaning in the universe, but they're not forced any beliefs upon them. And as for Buddhism, I think that what we take away from that is just the people are looking to grow their spirit more. People are looking to, I mean, that's why you see in the Western world there's a huge increase in meditation, there's a huge increase in yoga. It's because people are looking to grow that spirit, to cultivate that spirit. And so I think that's going to be a huge factor of the next church, is just spiritual practice and collective spiritual practice. So that's what we can take away from Hinduism and Buddhism. And how will we get there? Well, in my opinion, I mean, you don't really get anywhere without a single leader. I mean, I guess in the Great Schism, like I said, there wasn't really a person in charge of it, but Martin Luther, Gregory the Great, and Jesus, they were all instrumental, they're all the face. And let's think like Martin Luther King Jr. in the Civil Rights Movement. You need a face, you need a person to get to this church. And again, it might be like Martin Luther, where this person's goal is to not create a new church, but to reform the old one. And it just, from there, it might go crazy. So that's how I think we'll get there, is a leader. And just, I also think it'll have a lot to do with social media, with a lot to do with the internet, because if you look back to the Reformation, it happened because the printing press was invented around that time, and that allowed for the spread of all the information. And I'm sure if you look at all the past ones too, there was some new technology that helped spur it, that helped create it. And I think this new technology is social media and the internet, and I think so it'll be a combination of a strong leader and current technology to create the future church of Christianity. Thank you.
Eric, I have a question.
Yeah.
So you talked about the changes that they would have in Christianity, but it's already splintered, right? Because we already have Protestants and Catholics.
Yep.
Do you see any difference in the future for those two sides of
Yeah,
Christianity?
I mean, as you saw, let's say this as objectively as possible. I think the Catholics are more rooted in tradition. And that's why you see that the spiritual but not religious population, more of them are Protestant. The 35% compared to the 11%. And that's because there's a rise in liberal Protestantism where people are much more open-minded and much, I mean, I shouldn't say that sounds, but they're much more willing to look past the doctrines and the dogmas to figure out what's the truth of this world. So I think the group that's going to be hit more by the spiritual but not religious phenomenon is the Protestants, just because of where it's going right now. And then once that happens, it might also take equal effect in the Catholic Church. All right. Well, thanks for coming, everyone.
I think our future here is really bright. We've got some great kids that I'm smarter for being here today. And I have kids in my class, and when I'm talking about some of the things with economics, and they look at me and go, "What are you talking about?" I just had that revelation that tonight I was going for a couple of them. I knew them a little bit, but I'm a whole lot smarter for it tonight. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting your kids, your families, our school. Mr. Bullard has come in and said that he wants it to be about student-driven. We have 3 prime examples of student-driven education. So thank you again.